Hi, this is Pete Saronis, and welcome to this episode of Data Center Insights. I am super excited and fired up to be here with Dr. Charlie Harry and Tony Vicinelli. We're going to talk on this episode, that is, around a topic that's relevant today and most recently with the Colonial Pipeline and all kinds of critical infrastructure topics and events and things that we're dealing with as a country and as a world. Dr. Charlie Harry comes to us from the University of Maryland, where he's the Director of Operations in the Maryland Global Initiative for Cybersecurity. Its acronym is MAGIC. He's an Associate Research Professor at the University of Maryland, and we'll talk a little bit with Charlie about that background and how it's so relevant in today's society. But he's also a CEO and a founder of Decision Point Analytics. Charlie, welcome, and we're glad to have you here.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
You got it, Dr. Charlie Harry, that is. And Tony Vicinelli, Chief Technology Officer for Endlites Software Federal. Tony Vicinelli is an accomplished technologist, a thought leader inside the Beltway and outside. He's a storyteller. He's a conversationalist. He knows this space, that being critical infrastructure and how information technology and operational technology, which again is so relevant in today's society, is supercharged by the data center and all the promise, of course, that Endlight and its advanced analytics platform can bring to society, both the owners and operators of infrastructure, as well as the federal government. So Tony, super excited to have you here as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, and excited to get into this topic with you guys today.
Amen. All right, well, we're going to jump right in. Charlie, your background, your history, and your journey. Fill in a few gaps and talk a bit about that journey, which has not only brought you to the university, and also, inspired you to become a PhD in topics like cybersecurity, and why is this topic so important and relevant to you?
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. I always explain my background as kind of being a little weird. I was actually trained as an economist of all things, and spent quite a bit of time in the intelligence community working on a variety of complex kind of national security issues, but was trained in cybersecurity. And what I found very quickly was that cyber is not just a technical domain. While we get trained a lot of times in the bits and bytes and the technology, what is really important about it from a strategic perspective is how the technology supports the human process. How are those kind of complex systems that organizations run, whether it's building tires or whether it's kind of managing cargo container ships. All of those things are supported by technology, but they're human processes. And so for me, my journey through government, later into academia, was focused on trying to better understand how specific attacks on technology end up cascading through this kind of larger complex human system, right? And that's oftentimes what's missed when I go and talk to policymakers or talk to organizational leaders, is they don't understand you gotta understand both. It can't just be about technology, it's about how technology supports people and process.
Great framing for that topic, and we will get into that because this is a blend of tech, humanity, and culture, and making those risk-based decisions. Tony, same question to you. Endlight Software, your journey, what brought you to this point, why you love working in this space and for this company?
Yeah, I mean, I think, whenever I started working for Endlight and I saw the criticality of the data center and being able to have effective change on and affect a change on the data center, allowing people to sort of manage and measure this critical asset that was really the brain of their organization, right? Everything, like Grand Central Station, everything sort of passed through the data center or a data center like service or edge site. There's a number of different names, co-location facility. They had all of this compute that was essential to them running the business. And being able to give them an effective way to manage those assets, be able to measure their performance and project, their improvements through analytics was really, I mean, you saw, sometimes you get into companies that they do something kind of neat, right? But whenever you see those products actually transforming the business and making it easier for people to do their job and affecting change in the organization, has been great, And so as I started to learn the data center space and started to learn that it is critical infrastructure, I said, this is something I want to continue to learn about and continue to work with.
Well, I'm going to stick with you for a minute, Tony, and thank you for that. And again, I had a chance, if you don't mind jumping in on this conversation, fellas. I worked in the government for 25 years. To our audience, I was the chief technology officer at the United States Department of Energy. And it was an opportunistic time for me to really understand how these sectors that Charlie, you and Tony are talking about, the 16 critical infrastructure sectors: energy, water, transportation, manufacturing, water, impact humanity. And with today's artificial intelligence, machine learning, zero trust architecture, what an opportunity to leverage frameworks and tools that the government and industry are working on together. So terms like resilience and AI, Tony, coming back to Endlight as not so much a software company only, but a tool, a resource for agencies. Can you talk a little bit about what, frankly, is what you feel to be that secret sauce in this ever evolving roadmap at Endlight?
Well, I mean, I think that, from a product standpoint, this is just, it's listening to our customers' problems, right? Getting those things from the field and bringing them into the product is what, listening to those customers tell us, this is the problem that I have, and expressing that as a solution in the product. But as I'm, going and learning more about, especially its role in the federal government, the data center's role in the federal government, as you mentioned, you have those 16 sectors of critical infrastructure. In each one of those sections, whether it might be water or power, there's a data center that's at the heart of each one of those sections as well, helping them do their job, helping them, be effective in, managing, the everyday life of a power plant or a dam or what have you, right? An airport, right? And so sitting at the heart of all of those, I want to make sure that our software is helping our customers best manage those assets and be effective. What I've started to see in customers ask me about is, my data center is becoming more and more remotely available, right? I need to have access into my data center from just not necessarily being on site, even purposefully having sort of a, lights out data center where I don't necessarily want anybody in there except the critical people that need to be there. And I don't necessarily want to send someone out, to hinterlands to find out where, to make a change or to verify that something is, gone wrong. And so that automated, and with pandemic, right, this is another challenge, right? How do I have remote access to the data center? I see this more and more becoming a challenge, and this convergence of the IT world and the OT world is becoming very, very apparent. And so I'm just having more and more questions asked about, how can we better protect ourselves? How can we understand the impacts of this increased connectivity? And so that's what I'm really, here to learn from Charlie too, as far as like what are we considering everything, or some of the things I'm sure that I haven't considered about that increased connectivity in the data center, and how we can maybe express, a potential increase in risk that we may not be able to see from our normal data center view, right? That the normal metrics that we look at of power, space, and cooling don't tell the whole story about our potential risk profile that's being created. Keeping a data center, I'm sorry, Pete, just one more point. Keeping a data center up and running is hard enough as it is, without maybe somebody potentially coming after it to shut it down. I think that's a new reality that we have to really consider.
No, great points. And I'm gonna pivot over here to Charlie, because Tony, in a lot of our lead up to well, the preparation, you talked about assets and networks and systems, both physical and virtual, and the days of a data center being something that is brick and mortar might still be, but it's maybe in a cloud. It may be somewhere in another part of the world. So your points are, I think, not just relevant to, hey, we're evolving, the data center is evolving, and its role in society obviously is that much more important to operations, be it in government or industry. So good on that. Charlie, you have a global perspective. You are teaching students, you're educating our next generation workforce. You are a developer of software in your own right, but risk mitigation is a mantra of yours. Can you speak to a bit of this risk and cyber hygiene, if you will, physical cyber hygiene profile that has really taken over our lives and the news, and we see it each and every day, whether we're listening to a podcast or watching it on the television?
Yeah, no, happy to. I mean, as you well know, my research agenda at the university and the way that I interact with my students is very much focused around this idea of complexity and risk. And the real challenge going forward, and I've been arguing this even when I was in government, because as a former offensive guy, I'll tell you that understanding how things interconnect is really fundamental for understanding strategic risk, whether it's to an organization or to its one of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors, or what CISA calls the national critical functions, the very specific functions that are oftentimes include multiple sectors working together. So why is this important? Well, it's important because 30 years ago, when you were running your organization, you had your physical location, you had your lands, and maybe some distributed networks that were connecting, multiple regional offices, but you had physical hardware that you were maintaining on site. And the world today is a little bit different. You still have some of your on-prem solutions, but you have increasingly cloud architectures. You also have remote sensors that are interacting with a lot of those applications. So your attack surface for your organization or for the sector you are part of has grown exponentially, both in size and complexity, because as we've not only increased the geographic diversity of where all this material is, we have become increasingly more dependent on the use of information technology to support some of these other physical systems, these so-called IT/OT integration, right? So what does that mean? Why is that even relevant? Well, it's relevant because with all this additional complexity we're building, we as organizational leaders, we as policymakers don't understand the inherent risks that we're building into the entire global system, whether it's the movement of cargo, or the purification of water, or the movement of gasoline through a pipeline. And what is happening is we have concentrated risks in such a way where you can get basically a criminal organization that, if they know the right application server to go after, can shut down an entire business. And that's the lesson we've seen with whether it's Colonial or Atlanta or Baltimore or the Ukraine or down in Florida. That is what we're learning.
So I got to build off that, coming back to Tony, and thank you. I think interoperability is a key term that you mentioned, interconnectedness. And as we talk about a virtual world in the cloud and the government's moving to, whether it's, taking on-prem, going off-prem, being hybrid. Tony, can you, just because I find this interesting, at Endlight, you've labeled something called asset integrity monitoring. And that speaks to physical integrity, it speaks to computing architecture, it speaks to integrity of data. Can you elaborate a bit on that capability and why it's so valuable to government and industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have to know what they've got, right, before they can secure it. Right? And so this goes into a number of things of, that there are, audits that are being conducted, and there are, continuous monitoring that's being done. But we have to think about that as a holistic now, right? We have to think of it and also with understanding those components that are in our, in the envelope of the data center. And so for us, it's making sure you understand what you have, making sure that it is that there is a ledger, right, that we're looking at, that we understand, that we can reconcile with what we have documented with what is in the actual physical world, and that gap, and how do we manage that gap so that there are processes and enforcement in place so that we can make that gap maybe as tiny as possible. So there's kind of a layered approach of automated scans, no-touch audits, but processes and policies on top of that so that we're doing those on a regular basis. So those three things together, hopefully we can form, enough of a net to capture all the moves, adds, and changes that are going on in the data center. Because the problem has gotten very large. Well, right, there's so many moving parts in a data center that you can't do that through maybe traditional methods that were done once upon a time. And having the right tools in place allow you to measure your improvement, right, over time. Am I saving money? Am I more resilient than I was last year? Can I project what my improvements are going to be, and have I met those improvements? So all of those, analytics we want to make sure are possible as well. And then, we're looking at, can we determine, all of the normal metrics that we capture inside of Endlight, power, measuring for power, space, and cooling, and can we determine, is there a degradation of our ability to deliver services over time? And are those based off of wear and tear, or are they because there is somebody actively attacking the data center or creating that degradation? Those are things that I'm really interested in learning more about, as we go forward, as this becomes, I think, a more relevant topic. Whenever we were planning to do this talk, I was like, man, are we going to have to kind of sell the IT OT convergence story, and that the data center is a target? And I think that there's no question that it's only a matter of time where the data center itself is a target, because it's its own data service pipeline, right? It doesn't have oil in it, doesn't have gas in it, but it has its IT services it's trying to deliver out to its customers.
Yeah, I think that's a segue to talk about something that's relevant, this recent executive order on cybersecurity. And I think maybe it's no secret that, or improving the nation's cybersecurity, folks, if you check it out, it was published May 12th, 2021. Charlie, thoughts on that artifact, that document, and then speaking to Tony's point about the importance of analytics at Decision Point, for example, having data that's rooted in or aggregated and curated such that you can create integrity from it. Can you speak to the executive order and what it means to you as a practitioner, but also this significance on analytics and having the right tools to provide you that visualization or insightful information?
Yeah, no, I thank you for the question. As a researcher, I get an opportunity to look at a lot of executive orders, and so it's just, I guess, one of my hobbies that I like to look at. But in general, I guess I'm just one of those guys, that you talk about.
Hey, you're a propeller head, man. It's cool.
Exactly. I really dig on this. But what I will tell you about this latest executive order that's very, very different, just even on its face, is the amount of detail it goes into, right? When you typically look at a lot of government policy, it tends to be really vague and kind of high level. This executive order very specifically says, look, no, we need to get serious about kind of, the potential of compromised supply chains and how we actually worry about that, especially in government networks. And what they're starting to recognize very, very quickly is that the attack vectors are so multifaceted and the attack surface is so complex that we're very quickly running out of the ability to really deeply understand what our true risk is. Because for the longest time, when we conceptualize what the impact of a cyber attack is, it's usually in the context of data. It's, well, how much of my data is going to be compromised, and how many of my customers, data records are going to be compromised. And while yes, that's important, people were doing a computation of loss value based on, well, how much is it going to cost for me to, basically invest in either some sort of insurance policy that's going to pay for remediation costs, or more explicitly, credit monitoring services for my customers. And they come up with a number, and that number might be, $20,000 or $500,000. The problem is that you're starting to see other types of effects that completely degrade your core systems, whether that's core system is, on-prem or increasingly found in data centers, right? That are hosted and managed in data centers. And so when that happens, now you're not looking at a $500,000 loss. Now you're looking at a $200 million loss. You're looking at a $300 million loss. And in fact, if you wonder why Colonial paid the $5 million ransom, it's because they're looking at, no doubt, how long they're going to be down. They're looking at, well, if I'm down for 2 to 3 weeks, like Marisline was, you're talking about a more than $100 million loss. And that is the challenge, right? It's in the important, to your point, Pete, about the importance of metrics. Without effective metrics, without the ability to process map, without the ability to pair that with real-time analytics about likelihood of an event occurring, you're shooting in the dark. And so while you are spending a lot of money kind of going through this risk management process, oftentimes it's treated as a box check. It's like, well, I got to have it because the NIST framework tells me I got to have it. But the reality is you want to do criticality analysis. You want to say, what are those 2, 3, 4, 5 systems working together that actually support 80% of my revenue generation capacity, right? Without that, you're flying blind. So, yeah.
Well, no, thank you. Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, Charlie, can I ask you a question? Do you feel like whenever folks are doing that, should they work backwards, like almost like crown jewels out? Like or is there no kind of best practice? I mean, should they identify like a crown jewels or like services and then go from there?
No, it's a great question. This is an area we all struggle in. And one of the areas that I focus in both my research and obviously Decision Point, what we do is we focus less on the technology initially, and we focus on how you do your business. When I walk into a customer space or I'm doing a research project, the first person I want to talk to is usually the chief operations officer. And I want to talk to the chief ops officer. And my first question is, tell me about your business. Don't tell me about what tech you use. Don't tell me about, how this is all set up, in your network. Talk to me explicitly about how what do you make, or what is your business? And then walk me through how you make it. And then what I do, once I've done that type of general human mapping and organizational mapping, then I start to look at the technology. Because if you don't do that, and you kind of go to this crown jewel mentality, which I've seen a lot of people do, you miss all the different ways that attackers can come after you. Yes, you've protected that app server, but if you've done nothing to the router in front of it, and I take down the router and you have no packets that can traverse the router, guess what? You're not doing that particular service. And so it's not just about one place to attack, it's the entire attack surface. And understanding that more holistically is the key to getting a handle on this. And that's usually the advice that I give.
Right. So well said. An attack surface, it's larger. We have the Internet of Things, Tony, and I feel like I want to come back to you before we hit our parting shots here and just, DSIM, Endlites roots. It was born into that data center information management. But you've gone from, hey, it's not just about power utilization. Charlie just articulated routers, firewalls, servers. They're all part of the data center, and Endlight can help monitor that, correct?
It is, yeah, that is correct. And one of the main things that I think whenever we're, talking to a customer and things that are important to them, we have part of our analysis is outage impact analysis. But a lot of times just part of regular operations, right? You're conducting some sort of maintenance, or you might have an outage of some kind, and you say, well, I want to see how those things, how that outage may affect the mission, right? I've really started to, someone kind of put those things to me. It actually may have been you, Pete, that you started to say, think about mission. And you're right. It's mission assurance. Otherwise, and it's kind of, flavors of what Charlie was saying is, yeah, otherwise you're going to, if you get too bogged down in the cogs, right, of the machine, and think about, well, what is the purpose of this machine, and what am I, what is the mission that we're trying to perform here? Those are the types of things that I think that has set Endlight apart, is we're giving you that data in a way that helps you understand, can I continue to provide the service or operate the mission that I'm here to do, right? The reason that all of these blinking lights are here, right? And if we can give our folks, if we can give our customers data in that way and give them analytics and reports in that way, I think we're doing a good job.
No, wonderful. And just because it's the way my mind goes, Charlie, coming back to you, Tony had brought up the OT, IT references, not just in the executive order. Can you, for the Joe or Joanne six-pack out there, paint a picture of why OT, IT convergence is so significant in today's society?
Well, I mean, the convergence is basically supporting modern society. When you think about the water that you drink, or when you flip on the switch in your house, those are all leveraging physical systems that are increasingly being managed by information technology. And so when you look at the more consequential cyber events, what is happening is that attackers are going after the IT infrastructure, understanding they can manipulate the OT systems. Because it used to be, 50 years ago, if you wanted to turn a valve, you would call Joe and you'd say, "Hey, Joe, turn the valve, and close off this particular pipe." And, Joe would turn it. Well, that's not how things work anymore. Now you've got people that are sitting in a control room and they push a button. And so whether you're talking about the power going out in the Ukraine, or you're talking about additional chlorine, being added to water systems in Florida, or you're talking about pipelines that no longer work along the East Coast, what is happening is the attackers go after the IT infrastructure in order to manipulate the OT to have the physical effect. That is the reality, and it has been increasing in scope and scale for the last 15 years.
Succinct as always. And what I'm going to do is, just before I pass it off to Tony first for those wonderful parting shots, and then close it out with you, Charlie, is I'm taking away with what you just said, Charlie, that ensuring the physical integrity of a computing infrastructure is something that Endlight does really well, not just for the data center, but for other functionality. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tony.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, this has really opened my eyes. I mean, I had my eye on IT, OT convergence and cybersecurity in the data center, and said that, maybe those two worlds aren't really talking to one another, right? The folks that are running the data center, they got a very difficult job, and they're making sure that the data center is up and running, and the cybersecurity folks are doing their thing. And now I'm seeing those two worlds needing to have a language that they can talk to one another. And I think that Charlie had brought up a couple of things. I think that language is maybe the language of risk, right? How can we communicate those things to one another? And so it's, my intent to see how we can better communicate the risk that may live in the data center, and the understanding of that risk, the understanding of an event that happened in the data center, and understanding whether or not that was as I said, wear and tear on the system, or an intentional attack on the data center. I don't think people know that now, or they may not have the connection to maybe the hops that are taken. As Charlie said, there's so many technologies layered on top of one another that and there's the attack surface is so multifaceted that you may not be able to understand where that attack is coming from, unless you're sort of gearing up to do that hard work to try to understand it. So I definitely took that away from this talk today.
Yeah, and I'll distill that down to go to Charlie. Just for me, is that you just addressed this, that cyber and physical systems, Tony, are part of an overarching security architecture, and of which obviously Endlight is a component of that. You're not just plugging and playing a tool, but well said, man. And thank you for all that insight that you bring, and keep
Yeah.
doing what you do so well, bridging the conversation. Charlie, parting shots.
Yeah, so the world is getting complicated, or it's just getting more complicated. There's this kind of larger integration of technology that are supporting human processes. And so what does that effectively mean if you're running an organization? Well, it means things are getting hard. They're getting hard in understanding what are the things you need to protect. How do I decide where I need to invest in order to minimize the greatest consequence? And that is getting difficult. And I have been arguing for a while that the field of cybersecurity is expanded, and it's expanded to require basically folks to come in and more deeply understand these kind of integrations, between your business and the technology that supports it. The data center is kind of the heart of kind of modern technical stacks, right? You've got all these applications that are managed in the data center, is at the heart of this, right? But it is part of this kind of really, really complex interwoven tapestry that we need to worry about. And so organizational leaders going forward need to invest in this space. It is painful, yes. It is hard, yes. But if you don't do it, you really leave yourself open to strategic failure, which could be existential to your entire organization. And that's, I'll go and end there, but Pete and Tony, that I'm very passionate about this, and I look forward to trying to solve this problem together.
Yeah, Charlie, and I always learn a lot from you whenever we talk. So I appreciate you joining us today. This was awesome, and this could be a 3-hour conversation easily, because it's a big problem.
Well, I hope we can continue that. And Charlie, obviously, I love the word tapestry. This is a horizontal connected tissue discussion. This is not a cylindrical buy tool and plug in. I want to thank you both. You're incredibly passionate. You're super smart. Tony, keep doing what you do, bridging the government and industry. And Charlie, keep teaching those kids that we need a workforce to support this stuff in the future. So until the next time, shout out to Endlight, Decision Point, University of Maryland. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Tony.